Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, EmeraldPlanet. All the ecology news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's your host, Executive Director of the EmeraldPlanet, Dr. Sam Lee Hancock.
Hello and welcome to you from Washington, D.C. in the United States as we reach around the globe looking at 143 different nations, looking for the best processes, the technologies, and the products that can be used to bring a better quality of life to all citizens of the globe. These 7 billion souls are looking for the best ways to reach into the future, and one of those futures is rapidly changing in the Arctic Circle. And so we have an expert who is an author that spent a number of years traveling throughout that area, and she's going to be coming to us by Skype. So I just want to let you know, dear viewers, that if every now and then we have a drop or we need to reach in, then we'll go into some of our slides, and we'll be having the production crew try to reach Sara Wheeler. Sara Wheeler is our guest coming to us from London in the United Kingdom. And understand there's some big doings going on over there today, Sara.
It's unseasonably warm, actually, at the moment here. And also, it's the last day of the football season. So big dramas going on today as we decide who's going to be relegated from the Premier League.
Well, thank you for being with us and sharing with us about your many travels throughout the Arctic Circle. We're going to be taking 4 of those countries today and talk about some of your vast experiences there. And why don't you start off, we're going to bring up one of the slides. This is your book, and thank you for sharing that with us. And Sara, why don't you read one of your first passages, and then we'll get into some of the questions about Alaska and the United States Arctic Zone.
Yeah, sure, Dr. Sam, I'd like to do that. Let me read you a little bit about my travels in Alaska. What I did, one of the things I did in Alaska was I rode up the Haul Road, which is the only road route in the whole of the Arctic to the Arctic Ocean. And it goes from Fairbanks in Alaska up to Prudhoe Bay. And the Haul Road, it's properly called the Dalton Highway, was built to service the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, that holy grail of getting oil south before the big freeze. It was built in the 70s, of course. And I rode with a trucker called Jeannie, and she was heading up to Prudhoe Bay. So here we are. We've got past the Arctic Circle itself, heading north, and we were in the Brooks Range.
And while you're reading that, I'm going to have the map of Alaska brought up so we can see that, and then you can read your passage. Let's go ahead and bring that first slide up if you could, please. All right, go ahead, Sara.
That's correct. North of the Arctic Circle, Dr. Sam, and heading into the Brooks Range. Here we are. The Brooks limestone needles shot into cirrus cloud, proportion subordinated to the height imperative, as in an El Greco painting. Jeannie had become more voluble as we approached Journey's End. She had started to shout out the name on each sign. The road builders were keen on signage, and the forks of the rivers were capable of infinite subdivision, facilitating a maximum number of marker posts. "The west fork of the north fork of the Chandelier River," Jeannie yelled. As an act of preparation for the descent, waiting on the other side of the highest pass, she got out to lock our hubs, putting the vehicle into 2-wheel drive effectively, thereby gaining traction. For the first time, full slopes of ice foreshadowed the big freeze. The highway dropped away steeply on either side. Jeannie climbed back into the cab. The sun was setting, the sky painted rosy pink. When the valley was in shadow, level sunbeams continued to pour onto the white higher slopes in an effect of ravishing beauty, and the ice reflected and refracted purple light like cut crystal. Then all except the tips became dead white, and we experienced the transfiguration of alpenglow. When the shadows crept higher and submerged both slopes and ridges, alpenglow still lingered on the highest peaks, until eventually these too were quenched, glowing points going out like stars. We had crossed the Arctic Divide.
I tell you, that's absolutely beautiful. And let's bring up this next photograph, and this fits perfectly in the reading that you were doing there. What do you see as the connection, having traveled the Trans-Alaskan Highway, the mentality and the emotional ties between the lower 48 and Alaska and the Arctic zone through the experience that you had traveling there?
Well, I think there's two communities really. There's the indigenous peoples, the First Nations people of Alaska, and there's the settlers. Some of them have been there for many generations. And I think my experience was more positive than one would have thought, perhaps, in that regard, and that I think that they do feel very American and part of the lower 48, whilst feeling tremendously separated from it. I think the problem is that the issues that confront the people, both the indigenous peoples and the settlers in Alaska, are so very different from those ones in the lower 48. And of course, that's typified at the moment by the huge issues of drilling, to drill or not to drill. And I think that the people up there, in my experience, they see things rather differently, because their livelihoods depend very frequently on the jobs that the oil companies are going to bring in. And while they enjoy the landscape and the lifestyle, and certainly want the Arctic to remain pristine, the economic imperative to take the jobs that are going to come with increased drilling is something that I perhaps think is not widely understood in the lower 48. And that was something I sort of experienced in different forms throughout my travels. And I think the further north you get, the more attenuated the problem becomes, because, of course, the further north you get, the more people used to be reliant on traditional means, hunting and so on, hunting whales, for example. And that's the kind of thing that's really become marginalised in the economy of the lower 48, which has been imposed up there in the Arctic. So the conflict is felt much more acutely the more you move north.
Well, looking at the Dalton Highway and the Trans-Alaskan Pipeline, and having this experience riding in the truck, I'm sure you felt the pulse of the people from that experience, because you were traveling throughout most of Alaska, and actually you've probably seen many areas there that even many Americans have not experienced. So what was kind of the vibrancy of the culture and society, both the traditional, the native, the Indians there, and then also the Americans who have moved there over the years to take those jobs in forestry, oil, gold, and many of the other economic avenues that you have?
Well, the indigenous people take the jobs as well. I mean, to a certain extent, when you get to a settlement like Barrow, which of course is the most northerly American community that there is, the indigenous people there, the Inupiaq, they've been working in partnership with a lot of multinationals spanning all those industries you mentioned for some years. Very few people, nobody really lives exclusively off hunting anymore like in the old days. It'll be a mixed economy. They do go out hunting well and pursuing their traditional activities, but that will be in partnership with a job, for example, in Prudhoe Bay at the oil industries. My experience was one of great hope and great vibrancy, and a very exciting community that has a lot to teach those of us who are much more enmeshed in the traditional goings-on of the lower 48, which is very similar to all of Europe and so on. And I think to a certain extent, there's a lot of things in our own society that we have cause not to be proud of. So I found a lot of really good things, a lot of good values, solid values, belief and hope in education and that kind of thing. But I also found a great tension as we were imposing more and more of our own values upon people who perhaps have managed to escape the full horrors of what's going on down here. And that sort of tension, I think, has been working itself out since the first settlers got up there, and it's still got a long way to go. But it might not be bad, the outcome.
Well, the whole thing about it, too, as far as the first settlers, and many of those families are still there in Alaska and up near the Arctic zone, and many of them were escaping from the lower 48 and some of the strictures and the activities and urbanization. And of course, now as the United States, like most of the world, is becoming more urbanized, 54% of the people living in cities, Were you seeing some of those same pressures and some of the same modalities, the development of the urban areas in Alaska and up towards the Arctic zone that we've experienced in the lower 48 in the United States, the mainland of the United States?
Okay, I think that yes, definitely in Alaska, but no, not in Arctic Alaska, because of course all the real urban conglomerations, Juneau, Anchorage, and so on, are quite far south in Alaska. And once you get north of the Arctic Divide, where I was reading about in that passage, it's really still wonderfully free from all of that kind of stuff and that pressure, largely because it's not fertile. No trees, nothing grows. So it's always been hard for people to settle because there's no agriculture that could possibly survive. And, you know, Toyota aren't going to go and build a new plant up there any day soon, up there way north, because of it's inclement. So you need a sort of critical mass of people to get all those problems that you're talking about, Dr. Sam, that I see all around me in London and every city in Europe. And it's the climate and the environmental harshness that spared the Arctic North from those kind of things. Although it has brought pressures of another kind, but you'll find that almost everybody in Alaska lives near the south. So up there in the north, it's still a very thinly dispersed population. But they have problems, but they're not the same ones that we have.
I'm going to bring up this last photograph because we're getting almost into our last minute to just show some of the nature's wonders there as far as the lights and the landscape and all that. And the last question, and we have about 30 or 40 seconds, Sara. What is one of the main ideas or concepts you would like to share with our viewers about what's going on in the Arctic north of Alaska? And do you think the native peoples there are going to be able to maintain, or will this pressure from the international community be just too great and true change, real change is going to happen there, more of the urbanization of what you see around the globe?
I think we need to take a very realistic view, and we need to think of the people living up there, and we need to think about the fact that we need oil, we need minerals, we've got to get them out from there, that's okay, but let's do it in a sustainable way and in a humane way that allows the Arctic peoples to build an infrastructure that will last.
And so we feel like then, Sara, that we need to work with them so that there's this proper balance between the environment and where they're living. Is that correct?
Balance is the right word, I think, Sam.
Oh, thank you. Sara, we're going to be back for our next segment. We'd like to thank our audience for being with us as we're coming to you from Washington, D.C., as we look around the globe to create the Emerald Planet.